you get enough disruptions already, but we're throwing another disruption and largely one that they had nothing to do. And now every once in a while, they're kind of more involved in some facilities than others, but largely they have nothing to do with this particular trial. A doctor's interested in an instrument, and here you are. Here's a set of these things that get taken completely apart. I'll show you how to do that. Put them back together. I got to show you how to do that. It's a pain.
Rising above the buzz of ultrasonic cleaners and the clanking of stainless steel are the ideas and voices that are changing an industry. You're listening to the Beyond Clean podcast, the central nexus for the people, processes, and products that are improving our sterile processing world. Each week, we speak with frontline technicians, CEOs, engineers, and entrepreneurs with a common goal: to help you fight dirty, every instrument, every time. Whether you're tuning in for education or inspiration, we're glad you did. Now turn on those washers and turn up the volume. It's time to go beyond clean.
Hey there, Sterile Processing Universe. My name is Hank Balch. I'm in studio today with
Bobby Parker. What's going on, Hank?
Oh, not a lot, Bobby. I'm looking forward to today's episode talking about our vendors. We love vendors at Beyond Clean. They are, number one, they're what keeps the lights on for Beyond Clean, actually, and makes all of this kind of content, the educational podcasts, the CEs, the virtual conferences, it makes it all free for the sterile processing consumer. So obviously without them, on the Beyond Clean side, we couldn't do what we do, but obviously without vendors on the sterile processing hospital side, I've said it before, imagine a world with no products and no vendors. You'd be standing in an open field. There ain't no surgery going on without products and services, and we need vendors to do that. So on today's episode, Bob, we're going to be talking through that vendor perspective in connection with the process in the room.
I think vendors end up being kind of the sterile processing punching bag, like the favorite group that we love to hate on. I think my favorite nickname for vendors are reptiles.
Oh, no, I haven't heard that
chameleons
before.
Coming in the department.
That's sad.
Right. And certainly we've met some that we would prefer not to work with directly. But yeah, it'll be interesting to get to talk about surgery from the eyes of a vendor, what it's like in their world, stepping into that OR, what it's like culturally when you're coming in, trying to bring in a new product and trying to make a sale, but also depending on these people to make that happen for you as well. So excited to talk to Jeremy today.
Yeah, there's a spectrum, just like with everything else, there's a spectrum of quality engaged sterile processing departments. There's a spectrum of our engaged vendor partners. We're going to be talking to one on the other end of the spectrum. One of the great advocates out there really understands, I think, the pulse of this department. So hang with us here. We'll be right back in studio with Jeremy Adler in just a moment.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to Beyond Clean, the global voice of sterile processing.
All right, Clean Freaks, we are in studio now with Jeremy Adler, a territory manager up in Rochester, New York. I don't know if I've ever been up that way, Jeremy, so it's a pleasure to meet someone out there.
You're missing out, man. You're missing out a lot of snow, a lot of cold weather these days, but great part of the country, really. Western New York is, for all the Bills fans out there, it's a great area of the country, a lot of good, down-to-earth people. It's a pleasure to be on this program, Hank. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, good to have you. We were talking offline. Bobby was like, so how did you guys get connected? And it's the classic story of LinkedIn. That's how I get connected with all my friends these days. Is I saw him once on LinkedIn, or I saw her once on LinkedIn, and then we got plugged in, and the rest is history. So yeah, always fun.
Yes. It's a great platform. It's, it brings people like me and you together, right? And others. So, whereas in the past, it would have been a whole different ballgame.
I'll tell you what, the vision for this episode is interesting too in the context of that LinkedIn conversation, because out of all of the categories or the demographics of people that are active on LinkedIn, this rep space, the vendor rep space, is extremely active on LinkedIn. There's a lot of people out there talking, engaging, consuming, learning, sharing, disagreeing, and whatnot. And that's how we move the industry forward. And I think, you guys and gals are potentially even more engaged on LinkedIn than some of our clinical demographics. I think, sterile processing is probably an outlier. We are highly engaged all over the place in all kinds of different social channels. But when you get into some of the other areas, the reps just there's a lot of them there and they got a lot to say and they're all hungry to learn and to add value. And it's been really cool to see. So I'm not surprised that we stumbled into you.
Yeah, us reps, some more than others really like to talk, really like to be heard. And, it's a great, LinkedIn is just for general knowledge. It's a great resource for a lot of people. It still seems like, it's still, even though there's some disagreements and things like that, it still seems like people keep it mostly professional in terms of the back and forth, largely, generally speaking. So, yeah, I've enjoyed it and, enjoyed following you and commenting every once in a while on one of your posts that strikes me. So, yeah.
I see your stuff, vice versa. I'll weigh in on some of your content as well. You're talking about, some of even the kinds of topics that we're going to be discussing today. And I guess that's probably the best segue that I'm going to come up with to get us into the content here. But there's a lot that goes into getting the right tray in the right room on the right day. And, that is the burden of both sterile processing and the vendor rep as well. Give us an idea of how you manage those complexities and just the pressure of that as a rep, knowing not only you got this particular patient on the table that you're caring for, but you've also got this relationship with the surgeon in the background looming over you that, no matter what happens today, you're going to continue to manage that in the future.
Yeah, it's a good question. There is certainly, for us vendor reps, a lot of pressure when we get into the operating room. And for me, and I know we touched on this prior to this conversation, that maybe I'm lucky, maybe unlucky, but my interactions with surgeons in the OR isn't crazy like maybe an orthopedic spine rep, right? But I have to go in there for trials, laparoscopic trials. Sometimes we have neurokeratins, that type of thing. And so I know that world, that feeling of, and maybe even more so to some extent, because, I'm trying to get my products into the door, in the door of the hospital. I'm trying to make that sale. So I'm not already established. So I have to rely on a lot of people, even though it's maybe one set of instruments. I still have to rely on sterile processing. I have to rely on the scrub tech in the room, and of course the surgeon. And it's certainly a nerve-wracking situation, even if it's just a gallbladder surgery that I'm in there, standing in the room witnessing. Every time, a new instrument goes into one of those stroke cars, it's like, okay, let's hope this is put together properly by sterile processing. Let's hope it cuts smoothly. Hopefully it showed up at the hospital able to cut smoothly. But if not, hopefully sterile processing caught it in time so that we're not giving, that surgeon kind of a duller scissor. So you hit the nail on the head, man. You want that patient at the end of the day. You want that patient to have a good outcome. And there's a lot of stuff that has to kind of go right for that to happen. So, yeah.
Jeremy, I'm curious what your experience has been like being in the OR and advising a surgeon on how to use medical devices, right? So it's kind of a humorous conversation talking with reps who haven't gone to medical school and they're saying, trust me, doctor, like I went through 2 weeks of training. Like I know what I'm talking about. Have you ever found yourselves in those kinds of situations?
In terms of using the products, since again, mine are more laparoscopic or keratins, it's very, it's pretty straightforward. Sometimes they do have questions about different handle operations with ratcheting and stuff like that. But I have had instances where a doc wonders which jaw pattern, which instrument would be better for this type of use. So they're working on a colon or something, which is going to grab better, right? So he's asking my opinion, he or she is asking my opinion in that operation. It's certainly a unique, maybe interesting. you go into a surgery, you're not thinking, all right, mostly you keep your mouth shut. You're standing in the back, right? But when that surgeon starts to interact and ask those kind of questions, it's nice. I mean, it kind of levels the playing field. It makes you feel even more involved, right? And more of a part of that patient's outcome. But it's certainly a unique feeling. You kind of think in the back of your head, well, shouldn't you know the answer to this question already? So there's a little bit of that goes on. There's certainly times I've wondered, I've seen something being used and I've wondered, hey, I probably wouldn't be using that in that situation, but I don't say that out loud. That's in my head. I do enjoy when there's a interaction, when a surgeon is willing to ask my opinion. That's a very cool feeling. I've done this for 17 years, so I do have some background. I'm not a surgeon at all, but I've seen enough where I can feel like I can advise and give my opinion somewhat confidently.
Have you watched all the episodes of Grey's Anatomy as part of that training? Just kidding.
No, well, my wife is, so I don't know if that's through osmosis I'm getting something.
Yeah, the trial conversation I want to go back to, because I think this is an important point too, that almost every sterile processing department out there, at some point in the life cycle of your department, there's going to be trials going on. And there's not a lot of conversation, quite frankly, out there on how to do a trial correctly in the sterile processing process, right? Like, what are the expectations for when this one-time instrument's going to come in? Because to your point, this is not only the first time the surgeon has seen this instrument, it's often the first time sterile processing has seen this instrument if it's a new device or design. And so you're building a one-time workflow to compliantly process this thing, maybe one time, maybe it's a 3-week trial or, month trial, whatever. Like, I get that, but it's a temporary short-term process that's created overnight, that there's a lot riding on it in your perspective, because if sterile processing, if we drop the ball, no matter how awesome the tool is, it's not ready when the surgeon is ready to trial it. And that's a bad deal. So how do you navigate that, or how have you found it to be most successful to navigate the OR portion of those trials? And then also, what does SPD need to do or need to know or collaborate to make sure that we're contributing to the success of the trial and not taking away from it?
Yeah, very good point, because what we're doing in those situations, especially for sterile processing, is we're being a pain in the butt.
I'm glad you're honest.
Right, something in, we're disrupting. You get enough disruptions already, but we're throwing another disruption, and largely one that they had nothing to do. And now, every once in a while, they're kind of more involved in some facilities than others, but largely they have nothing to do with this particular trial. A doctor's interested in an instrument, and here you are. Here's a set of these things that get taken completely apart. Got to show you how to do that. Put them back together. Got to show you how to do that. It's a pain. And so the sterile processing portion, like it is for all new products, I guess, that enter, it's all about the education piece in service. So you got to make sure they're in service properly. And when a trial happens, ideally, it doesn't always get to happen because of scheduling, but ideally I'd like to be present the first or second or whatever time that a set is put together. That's the main part, right? It's when it's put together on the clean side. And I like to be there just to make sure that everything did get put together properly, that then everything is functioning as it should be. And that is a way that I can help them through this disruptive situation, because it certainly is disrupted for sterile processing. On the OR side, it's a little bit, I think, easier from a vendor perspective, because the way we're approaching the set is put together in the room. As long as I'm confident about that, the set shows up. I can go in and introduce myself to the scrub tech and any other nurses that are in the room. And then at that point, that gets put on the table, and then it's up to the surgeon, right, to give it a go. So the OR piece for me is pretty straightforward, pretty easy. I usually bring in an instrument that I have in my hand in case a doctor, like we talked about just a bit ago, in case he has a question about the function of the handle. Sometimes the ratcheting mechanisms are different from lap instrument to lap instrument. So I'll have that there in my hand just in case he has, and I can show him. But largely, it's for trial purposes. What I've found over the years is sterile processing is besides the surgeon, of course, liking the process, sterile processing is the key to the whole thing. again, I can't be there. Unfortunately, I can't always be there in kind of walking them through putting it together. So you got to have that faith, that trust. And you got to understand if something does go wrong and something is just not put together properly, or that is going to happen because these are new items that you're a whole new process that you're kind of giving to these people for a week or two. Not that you want to accept those issues, but you got to be willing to roll with and understand that it's possible that it's going to happen. If it does, it's a bummer, but it's certainly not worth getting upset over, in those situations.
Yeah, Jeremy, that's a really good point. Part of what we're trying to do in this season on Planet Surgery is maybe peel back some of the layers about like what really goes on in the OR and what it's like being in the OR. And so I'm curious from your perspective, like as a rep, you've got a vested interest in making sure all these instruments are 100% ready, that they're sterile, that they're assembled correctly. You've come days beforehand. You've done all the in-services. It's the day of the procedure. You got there way early, paid your parking pass, bought your rep scrubs, all those things. And now you're set up in the OR ready to go. And for whatever reason, maybe wasn't assembled correctly or something, benign, like a hole in a filter or a broken lock or something on a tray. The instruments aren't ready. Like, talk us through what that's like from the perspective of being the rep in the room, and particularly when it's a sterile processing instrumentation issue and you're the rep in the room, they're supporting those instruments.
Obviously those situations, and it's happened to me. It's frustrating, right? It's the same feeling I'm sure a doc gets when something, a hole in a rat, it's frustration, but I think again, with my situation, my thought process, I'm always, since the day I started, I had a great rep that I learned under. His focus was always on sterile processing. And largely what we do now in Aesculap, in my division, is heavy sterile processing driven. So, and Hank would know, and from just commenting, and so I'm an advocate for them. So while those situations are incredibly frustrating at the time, you got to chalk it up as an opportunity to do another in-service to the idea, of course, with a trial is that your product will be there like long term. And so it never hurts to keep educating. And when something like that happens, it's an education situation largely. If it's a hole in something, if a lock, we're humans, and sterile processing is a human process. Those things are inevitable. Those things are impossible to prevent 100% of the time. So I've always taken that perspective and understood this. Unfortunately, stuff happens all the time. Usually it's, you get there early, you paid your parking, you got your dumb rep scrubs and you're delayed for whatever reason, so even if there was a problem, we could catch it and, reprocess that before the case even started anyway. So it's incredibly frustrating. I live it every day just hearing about it from customers, every single day of this happened, that happened. Obviously some of it's more preventable than others, but, if a lock gets, brushed off a tray or there's a pinhole in a filter, that's just stuff that you've got to just, as a rep, you've been there, you can't stress about those type of things, or you can't worry about it as well, because it's unfortunately going to be a part of your gig.
Talk to us about the vendor community at large, right? Like, you're connected with a lot of different vendors, a lot of different companies all over the U.S. I'm assuming most vendors, if you've been working in a territory for an amount of time, you kind of get a pulse for the sterile processing departments that you can have a higher level of confidence in, and those that, for all kinds of different reasons, you have a lower level of confidence in. Is that a pretty well-known thing in the vendor community? Like, is that knowledge that's shared amongst each other and saying you should spend maybe a little extra time on X, Y, and Z?
It's certainly a known thing. I don't personally talk about it, maybe in passing, but you're absolutely right. There's, I obviously won't name any names, but there's, vendors have the list right in their head of like, this place, you got to hold their hand more. This place, you can kind of just set it there. And we know that set's going to be good to go, save for these random, things that could go wrong. I hope it's not discussed too much out there, but yeah, just in passing, I would say the vendor could be, but as a vendor, you are well, and you have to work with sterile processing in any capacity. You're well aware of the departments where you have, 100% confidence that they're going to get the job done for you, and the ones where you wouldn't want your mom to have surgery.
Well, that's one of the reasons that I bring that up, for the backdrop is we talk obviously in sterile processing. We know individually, if we're a tech or if we're a leader of a particular department, we know our own challenges. Unless we're travelers, we haven't necessarily been around, but, specific to reps that have a particular territory, we're going to the same hospitals all the time. You're pretty well plugged into that community of hospitals. You get a perspective on the territory that even sterile processing leaders don't necessarily have about what are the challenges at these other locations. Surgeons are the same way, like unless they're practicing at a particular facility, they may not know that this other hospital has specific challenges around SPD, and the patients definitely don't know. We've talked about that on other podcasts and episodes around, as a patient, if you're looking to do a procedure, you're like, what doctors are on my insurance? Okay, great. How are those doctors graded? Okay, great. Do I know anybody that's been with that doctor, or do I know anyone that's been at that hospital? But that's kind of the extent of your insider knowledge. And then you go beyond that to what our vendor partners know, which is, the good, the bad, the ugly. And to your point about something as simple as a trial, it impacts how you approach that confidence level, how much attention you feel like needs to be shown to make sure that's successful. And I think it's not about, to your point, it's not about trying to bring any department down or, anything like that. It's just about the awareness of we are all at different levels. And, how do we support that as an industry at large and at scale to try to drive efficiencies and safeties to bring everybody up to that higher level of confidence that you can treat every department exactly the same as you're coming in as a vendor. And I don't know the answer to that question, quite frankly.
But you're right. You start to, as a vendor, and it happened, very early on in my career, you start to know and see too much. There's certainly hospitals that I've been to, and that I would beg a family member, just maybe you should, not, go here. And it's not even always, you can look up infection rates, right? And stuff. It's not always even about that. It's just things like if they don't have bad infection rates, you feel like they're any day going to have bad infection rates. So you're exactly right. It would, I have, a couple great departments where I, just like you're saying, that just, the leadership's awesome. They're forward thinking. They're willing to, and the hospital itself is willing to invest in them, which is largely, I think, we can go off on a tangent about, that is largely what I think the issue is in sterile processing.
That's what I was going to ask you, what is that defining feature you would say on the ones that draw the most confidence? Is it investment? It's the hospital, and the hospital is willing to invest in people and technology and just improvement, right? It's, hospitals largely, I feel like, still look at sterile processing as that cost center, which is just insane to me. The operating room, revenue generating operating room cannot function without sterile processing. So how on earth are they not given the same investment as the operating room is? So that's large in where I am in upstate New York. I feel like we're still, we're like behind some of the other areas of the country I've been in the past where, I still have many hospitals that don't have an instrument tracking system. So the techs in these departments are not set up for success. They're not set up with, hey, I don't know this instrument. I'm new. I don't know this instrument. Oh, hey, there's a picture on the screen of the instrument. That helps. They don't even have simple tools like that. And to me, that is the one main thing is investment. Just some administration don't think it's worth it, obviously. Whereas the ones that I find are the most successful have the leadership that is appropriate, and they have the backing of, the administration to make changes that
have such a positive impact on the rest of the entire operation of the operating room.
And when you've got that kind of investment, you start to get to the place where you're able to be a bit proactive instead of just drowning all the time and trying to make it work. And then all of a sudden Sterile Processing's maybe reaching out to Jeremy and saying, hey, the schedule says this peculiar thing. Did you know you had a case tomorrow? And like trying to actually solve some problems. So I agree 100%. I want to take us back inside the OR and hear a little bit more about what that role looks like as you're there on a consultative basis to help the procedure go smoothly. Obviously, you're getting there before the procedure, getting instruments set up, making sure that the scrub tech knows how to assemble the pieces. Maybe you're standing against the wall with a little laser pointer, gesturing and things like that. If the case goes smoothly and you're not getting a whole lot of involvement with the surgeon, asking you 20 questions about which grasper to use, what does the end of that procedure look like? And maybe after the procedure is over, kind of walk us through the rest of the workflow from a rep's perspective.
Yeah. So largely, knock on wood, the case goes smooth with little interaction with me at all, right? I'm there watching on the screen, and then that's about it. Making sure, I guess, there in case something goes awry. After the case is wrapped up, not always, but a lot of the times as a rep, again, this is in the kind of an evaluation of a set, we'll have forms for a doc to fill out real quick. Hey, you liked it, you didn't, what worked, what didn't, real quick. I always thank everybody in the room that was there, whether they did anything for you or not. Just, you're a guest, and just thank everybody for just allowing you to be there. And then I would, if able to, I like to not necessarily take the set down to Sterile Processing, but meet the set down in Sterile Processing and make sure that the set can be taken apart. Like, again, new situation for somebody, make sure everybody knows how to take it apart, just clean it off appropriately and kind of go through the rest of the process. And an ideal kind of nice schedule kind of day, right? Sometimes it doesn't go as smoothly as that, even after the case. I got to run somewhere else because of something, but it's nice when they go like that. It's nice when the doc signs off. Hey, we'll use these long term if they, the hospital purchases them, and then just making sure that they get to where they need to get decontaminated, so the next doc can try it either later that day or the following day.
Right. I suspect if you were to ask any sterile processing department what their biggest frustrations are about their vendors, probably number one would be the instrument trays show up too late for them to have time to process it. But number two easily would be they leave their stuff in our department for like months at a time. Like we become the storage facility for instruments that they just didn't need to take somewhere else. I'd say that's probably a bigger issue with orthopedics and neuro. But Jeremy, what is that about? Like why did those outgoing loaner rooms just get filled up with junk, and sterile processing departments are shaking vendors by the collar trying to get them to take their stuff out of the facility?
It's a great thing. Every week, at least I hear this once a week, at least, as somebody complaining about somebody else having their stuff there in the storage room. For a vendor, I believe it all comes down to convenience. Sometimes probably laziness, but I think it's just a convenient situation. They don't, if it's already in the hospital, maybe it'll accidentally get used too. So it's funny how all these issues, and we could rattle through 100 of them that are consistent no matter where you are in the country, no matter what little pocket you're familiar with. These are standard things that are just always an issue. No matter how many policies these places, hey, you got to get your stuff out. Hospital policy. Okay. Doesn't happen. So nobody enforces it then. So it's kind of goofy, but yeah, that's a very common thing with vendor trays, even up here in Rochester, Buffalo, New York.
Yeah. Jeremy, I'm glad that we went the direction that we went with this episode. Product eval and trialing wasn't necessarily in my sights when we set it up, but it is such an uncovered issue, like I mentioned earlier in the episode. And I think just value-wise, stopping our day-to-day for a moment as an industry and thinking anew of, oh yeah, we got these instruments coming in. They're coming in hot, if you will, like out of left field. Do we have IFUs? How we had in services? Are they built into a tracking system if we have a tracking system? How do we build them in temporarily or contingently, depending on how the trial goes? If we don't have a tracking system, How are we manually tracking to make sure that we are properly reprocessing and that we're not losing these things if they're not paid for? All right, we didn't talk about that. Really interesting to pause, talk together, think together. As we mentioned at the beginning of the show, you're active on LinkedIn. I've seen your advocacy out there. You're asking good questions. You're proposing good topics to consider. As we wrap here, what else, as that advocate for SPD, as a vendor, what else would you want sterile processing users or the audience to know about the process that we've been talking about, or to know about themselves, or to your perspective on the industry as we wrap?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I've always been an advocate for sterile processing. So it maybe other vendors, in my position aren't. And I can say they're probably harder it might be harder for sterile processing folks to deal with. I probably spend 75% of my time in the sterile processing world, service, selling, all that stuff. And there's some great people that I get to deal with day in and day out, and that care, that have a passion for this industry. And I always have such respect and admiration for that, because it is it's like you're like an unsung hero. It's not a job that people like look up to, so to speak. But I feel like, I don't know, I feel like one day it has to be, because of how vital it is to what, to people's health. I mean, it's such a vital component to a hospital or a surgery center that I've always felt like, and again, this is like 17 years in now. I'm surprised, it's getting better every year, but I feel like it's got to take that one giant leap toward something like that's more important. Like everybody, like nurses are great. And but you see nurses on TV, right? You see nurses. You don't see like sterile processing folks. And so I feel like you talked about earlier, like a patient's going to have surgery. Sterile processing isn't a thought in their head. I didn't know it existed 17 years ago. So and you guys do great work, and there's other people that do great work about getting that word out, because I've just always thought that it's always boggled my mind first that doesn't get, I always use the word respect, but I don't feel like they get the respect they deserve, but I also don't think that they get the investment they deserve to be at their best. So I feel like sterile processing is always behind the 8 ball, that they're always kind of scratching and clawing and trying to get whatever couple bucks they got for this or that, or, to replace a sterilizer that's 40 years old. It takes, like 2 years to come up with funds. Like, I feel like I got to keep being the advocate, because I think one day it's really going to turn into more of a job that's kind of like looked up to, because I feel like it's that important and always have. And so, yeah, I've trials, getting back to the point of, what we're talking about, when I do a trial, I focus on sterile processing because I need them more so than I would focus on the operating room. I will be in the operating room. I'll be there to support the surgeon. Largely, though, it's, again, knock on wood, largely it's pretty straightforward stuff. I'm just there in case anything goes amiss. But the biggest reason for anything to go amiss, I guess, or for success, would be the sterile processing folks in every single situation. I have to rely on them. I have to have confidence in them. And again, 99 times out of 100, they've come through for me. And so I appreciate the industry and what people do. And yeah, I appreciated, you inviting me on this podcast, man.
Yeah, terrific conversation. Your passion obviously is right down the target for what we want to cultivate here at Beyond Clean, which is that collaborative spirit for everybody who's working together, ultimately for the patient. And yeah, you got to rely on each other. Like you're saying, we want to cultivate that trust, and we want every department to be able to work its way up to where they trust each other in the operating room. In SPD, there's trust for the vendors who support us, and then fundamentally, there's trust for the patients, even if they don't think about us, to your point, but they committed their care to us, and we owe them the best. So yeah, really appreciate all the conversation today and your ongoing advocacy out there in the LinkedIn space. Thanks for coming on the show.
You got it, man. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Bobby.
All right. right, that was Jeremy Adler, Territory Manager out in Rochester, New York, the other side of New York, right? When people say New York, the city gets all the love, Bobby, but then there's a whole rest of it's a pretty large state. There's a lot of other activity that's going on in New York, even outside of healthcare. But obviously, we got a lot of connections in that area through Beyond Clean. I know we got some advisory group members that are up in that direction as well. So it's nice to get some insight from that part of the world today.
Yeah, for sure. Frank Sinatra never wrote a song about Buffalo. I think that was the problem. I really wish in our conversation we had gotten more into the cultural piece of it. I'm just trying to put myself in that red hat in the OR, and we interface a lot with those reps in sterile processing. It's not uncommon to talk to a rep about really being an advocate for sterile processing, wanting to build that relationship. Obviously, they have a big financial incentive to do so, like they want sterile processing to do well for them. But man, when you get in the OR and you're trying to win over that surgeon and that surgeon's really upset with sterile processing, I can imagine the cultural pull to be on team surgeon and participate in tossing SPD right under the bus, right? That's a complex situation to be in. But yeah, it was a nice conversation with Jeremy today.
Yeah, we've talked about this once or twice in the past on Beyond Clean content. The value of that surgeon relationship over the course of their career can be multi-millions. If you're talking about like orthopedic relationship or spinal instrument relationships. And so, yeah, it's not just a cultural pull, it's a financial pull to be on team surgeon too.
Mm-hmm, yep.
But, Jeremy brought up the most important part of all of that is, yeah, that's great. You got a multi-million-dollar relationship with a surgeon, but if you got an SPD that can't get your instruments or your trials or whatever else it is to the surgeon on the right day, right room, right time, clean, sterile, functional, then it doesn't matter how much that surgeon is worth, doesn't matter how good those instruments are, it's going to be a broken relationship. So I think no matter how you cut it, becoming an advocate and understanding the value and investing your time and your effort as the vendor into pulling up that sterile processing team and equipping and encouraging and respecting, that's a winning scenario no matter how you cut it, in my opinion.
And all the sterile processing people said, amen.
Amen. Okay. That's going to do it for this episode. I hope you're enjoying Planet Surgery as much as we are, getting these different perspectives about what's going on in the room related to our instruments and how everybody else has a different insight and perspective on that. And when it hits the fan, how we all respond differently and what that looks like. If you want to hear more kinds of thematic seasons like this, if you got something that you feel like we haven't covered enough, we'd love to hear from you. Shoot us an email, reach out in the comments section, let us know, and we'll try to work that into future episodes and seasons. But hang with us. We're not quite done with this season yet. Got more to come. Until we talk to you again next week, keep fighting dirty.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Beyond Clean. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing to Beyond Clean on your favorite podcast app or by downloading the smartphone app on iPhone or Android. Simply search for Beyond Clean in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@beyondclean.net. We look forward to hearing from you.